Captain Lydia Morgan had always been different from the other officers in the Marine Corps' Special Operations Command. At just over 5 feet tall, with amber eyes that could spot movement a mile away, she moved through Naval Base Coronado with calculated grace. While others commanded with volume, her teammates called her Phantom, not because she disappeared, but because she struck with perfect timing when lives hung in the balance. The shot she would eventually make, saving 20 fellow operators while bullets rained down around her position, would cement her legend forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The early morning fog rolled across the shooting range as Lydia adjusted her custom M40A6 sniper rifle, which she'd affectionately named Whisper. The California coastline provided challenging conditions, shifting winds, variable humidity, and unpredictable fog patterns that most marksmen found frustrating. Lydia found them perfect. "Morgan, range is closing in 20, called Lieutenant Commander Davis as he checked his watch. "Just need 10 more minutes, sir," Lydia replied without looking up, her hands making microscopic adjustments to her scope. Davis shook his head but smiled. "Take your time. The targets aren't going anywhere." But Lydia knew better. In her world, targets always moved, conditions always changed, and a single moment of imprecision could mean failure when it mattered most. That's why she stayed after hours, why she arrived before dawn, why she maintained her weapon with obsessive attention while others hit the mess hall or called home. Her daily routine never varied. Up at 0400, 5-mile run along the beach, breakfast alone while studying weather patterns, morning training with her unit, and then extra hours on the range perfecting what others considered already perfect. Her scores weren't just excellent, they were literally flawless. 100% accuracy at distances that made other snipers shake their heads in disbelief. "You know, normal people have hobbies," joked Sergeant Rick Torres, her spotter and the only person Lydia might consider a friend. "They watch movies, go on dates, relax occasionally." Lydia lined up her shot, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger. The target, positioned at 1,200 meters, showed a perfect center hit when viewed through her spotting scope. "This is my hobby," she replied simply. Torres had learned not to push. The team respected Lydia's skills too much to question her methods, even if they found her intensity unsettling. During downtime, they played cards or shared stories about home while Lydia studied topographical maps or practiced breathing techniques. When asked about her background or future plans, she'd simply say, "I'm here to do a job." But there was something else about Lydia that her teammates couldn't quite define, a tension in her shoulders, a vigilance that never switched off, as if she was perpetually preparing for something catastrophic. Her quarters were spotless, her gear maintained with scientific precision, but her personal belongings were minimal. No photos, no letters, no mementos, just a small silver compass and a folded newspaper article she kept in her footlocker that no one had ever seen. Captain James Harrison, her commanding officer, often cited Lydia as the standard for the unit. "Morgan represents what we should all strive for," he'd announced during briefings. "Discipline, precision, dedication." But even he noticed the invisible barrier she maintained between herself and everyone else. During mandatory psychological evaluations, Lydia passed with textbook perfection, almost too perfectly, some would later realize. As 2023 progressed, intelligence indicated increased terrorist activity in the Horn of Africa, particularly around suspected weapons caches in Somalia. MARSOC teams were assigned increasingly dangerous reconnaissance operations, and Lydia's exceptional skills were in high demand. "We deploy next week," Harrison informed the squad during their evening briefing. "Deep recon mission near Mogadishu. Intelligence gathering and potential target designation for a drone strike." Lydia nodded silently, but those who knew her noticed a slight change in her posture, a barely perceptible straightening of her spine. That night, she remained on the range long after the others had left, firing shot after shot at targets, positioned at impossible distances. Each bullet found its mark with mechanical precision, but there was something different in her technique, more focused, more intense, as if she was preparing for something beyond standard training. The mission briefing revealed they would operate in one of the most hostile environments in Africa. A 12-person team with minimal support and satellite communication checks every 6 hours. Lydia would serve as the team's primary sniper, with Whisper ready for immediate deployment. The coordinates placed them in remote, mountainous terrain that intelligence suggested contained multiple enemy combatants. When Harrison opened the floor for questions, Lydia raised her hand, unusual for her. "Sir, what's our extraction protocol? IF communications are compromised?" Harrison frowned slightly. "Standard procedure, Morgan. Is there a specific concern?" "Just preparing for all contingencies, sir." That night, Lydia wrote a letter she never intended to send, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it in her footlocker beneath the mysterious newspaper article. She cleaned Whisper one final time, loaded her custom ammunition, and tried to sleep, but rest wouldn't come. Something about this mission felt different, consequential in a way she couldn't articulate. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She couldn't have known that in 72 hours, most of her team would be dead, and her life would change forever. The harsh terrain of Somalia's northern mountains stretched endlessly before Lydia's team as they moved through narrow passes. 3 days into their reconnaissance mission, the oppressive heat and constant vigilance had worn everyone down, everyone except Lydia, who navigated the treacherous landscape with preternatural ease. "Phantoms in her element," whispered Corporal Matthews, the team's communication specialist, as he watched Lydia scale a particularly difficult rock face ahead of them. Like she was born for this. Captain Harrison kept his eyes on Lydia's position. She'd been uncharacteristically alert since they'd crossed into the target zone. Her hand signals were crisp and precise, her movement patterns textbook perfect, but there was something in her posture that suggested she was anticipating danger they hadn't yet encountered. The intelligence briefing had indicated enemy movement near a suspected weapons cache, but so far, they'd found nothing but empty terrain and occasional distant sounds of local wildlife. Harrison was beginning to wonder if their information was outdated when Lydia suddenly raised her fist, the signal to freeze. Through her enhanced scope, Lydia scanned the path ahead, something catching her attention. The ground looked wrong. Too uniform, too deliberate for natural terrain. She'd seen enough improvised explosive devices to recognize the subtle signs: displaced stones, vegetation that didn't quite match the surroundings, scratch marks where heavy objects had been dragged. She turned to signal Harrison, but before she could communicate the danger, Corporal Matthews stepped forward onto what appeared to be solid ground. The explosion was devastating. The pressure plate IED had been expertly concealed, designed to detonate under the weight of a fully equipped soldier. The blast threw Lydia backward against a rock wall, her ears ringing, vision blurred, debris raining down around her. When the smoke cleared, she found herself partially buried under fallen rocks, her left leg pinned, Whisper thrown several feet away. Through the settling dust, she could see the horrifying aftermath. 7 of her teammates were scattered across the rocky landscape. Harrison, Matthews, Torres, Wilson, Shin, Rodriguez, and Davis, all dead or dying, their bodies thrown in different directions by the blast, some partially buried under debris from the landslide the explosion had triggered. Trapped and listening to the terrible silence that followed, Lydia heard no groans, no calls for help, no radio chatter, just the sound of settling rocks and her own labored breathing. She tried to move her leg and nearly passed out from the Pain, definitely broken, possibly shattered. Her radio was destroyed, the pieces scattered around her. As consciousness faded in and out, Lydia became aware of voices, distant but approaching. Foreign voices speaking Somali. Enemy fighters. Drawn by the explosion, coming to investigate and collect weapons and intelligence from the dead Americans. With tremendous effort, Lydia managed to free herself from the debris, biting back screams as she pulled her injured leg from beneath a large rock. Whisper was intact but partially buried. Her backup sidearm was missing, blown away by the blast. She had maybe minutes before the enemy fighters reached her position. The logical choice was to try to escape, to find a defensible position and signal for extraction. But Lydia's training and instincts told her something different. These mountains were crawling with hostile forces. A wounded American soldier trying to navigate enemy territory with a broken leg, and no radio would be captured or killed within hours. Instead, Lydia made a choice that would define the next decade of her life. She gathered her remaining gear, Whisper, her ammunition, and her survival pack, and began dragging herself toward a concealed position she'd noticed earlier during their approach. It was nearly impossible terrain, requiring her to pull herself up a steep incline while dragging her rifle and injured leg. But Lydia had always been stronger than she looked. The enemy fighters arrived 20 minutes later. Through her scope, Lydia watched them examine the blast site, collect dog tags and weapons, and take photographs. They spent hours searching the area but found no trace of a 12th soldier. The rockslide had covered her tracks, and her training and concealment had left no obvious signs of escape. From her elevated position, Lydia realized she faced a critical choice. She could try to signal the search and rescue helicopter she could. Here in the distance, identify herself and return home to safety. Or she could stay hidden in the mountains and continue the mission her team had died trying to complete. She thought about the intelligence briefing, the weapons cache they'd been sent to locate, the supply routes that ran through these mountains. She thought about Matthews, who had been 3 weeks away from his wedding. She thought about Torres, who had 2 young daughters and a son in Texas. Lydia made her decision. She would stay, she would complete the mission, and she would make sure her team's sacrifice meant something. The search and rescue teams found 11 bodies, 11 dog tags, 11 weapons. They found pieces of Lydia's equipment, a damaged scope, torn fabric from her uniform, even her backup sidearm, but no body, no blood trail, no definitive proof of death. After 72 hours, the search was called off. The official report read, Captain Lydia Morgan, AMIA, presumed killed by enemy action. Her parents received a folded American flag and a silver star posthumously awarded for her service. The military held a memorial service with an empty casket. Her name was etched into the memorial wall at Naval Base Coronado. But Captain Lydia Morgan wasn't dead. She was just getting started. The first 3 months nearly killed her. Lydia had survived the initial weeks after the explosion by scavenging equipment from enemy positions, using her sniper skills to eliminate isolated sentries and collect their supplies. She'd found a network of small caves in the upper elevations that provided concealment and protection from both the elements and enemy patrols. But she hadn't anticipated how brutal the Somali climate could be. Scorching days followed by freezing nights, sudden violent storms, and periods of drought that made water collection nearly impossible. With only military rations, a damaged medical kit, and no reliable heat source, Lydia spent months on the edge of survival. She learned to hunt local wildlife with precision shots that attracted no attention. She learned to collect and purify rainwater with salvaged equipment. Most importantly, she learned to become completely, utterly invisible. During those first few months, Lydia had ample opportunity to signal for extraction. American helicopters flew reconnaissance patterns over her area regularly. She could have easily created a signal fire or used reflective materials to attract their attention. Instead, she watched them pass and remained hidden. The reason was simple. She had discovered something extraordinary. From her elevated position, Lydia had observed enemy supply routes that weren't in any intelligence briefing. Weapons convoys moving through hidden mountain passes, ammunition caches being established in remote locations, communication networks that stretched across hundreds of square miles of supposedly empty terrain. The explosion that killed her team hadn't been random. It had been carefully planned to eliminate American reconnaissance in this specific area. Lydia realized that her official death was actually an advantage. Enemy forces weren't looking for her. American forces weren't looking for her. She was completely invisible, free to observe and operate without constraints or oversight. She could gather intelligence, disrupt enemy operations, and protect American forces in ways that would be impossible for an official military unit. So she stayed. Over the following months, Lydia established an elaborate early warning system throughout the mountain range. Using salvaged electronics from destroyed enemy equipment, she created motion sensors, communication intercepts, and surveillance networks that covered every major approach to the region. She mapped enemy patrol routes, documented supply schedules, and identified key personnel in the local command structure. Her first targeted elimination came 6 months after the explosion. An enemy scout had been positioning himself to observe American helicopter flight patterns, clearly planning an ambush. Lydia's shot from 800 meters was clean and silent. The scout simply disappeared from his position, his body falling into a deep ravine where it would never be found. She developed a signature for her work, a small carved symbol of crosshairs, surrounded by what looked like a wisp of smoke, which she left at the scene of each successful mission. Local enemy fighters began to whisper about a mountain spirit that protected the valley, eliminating their scouts and sabotaging their operations. Years passed. Lydia's hair began to show premature gray from stress and exposure, but her hands remained steady, her eyes sharp. She aged gracefully in her mountain stronghold, maintaining physical condition through constant activity and careful nutrition from her increasingly sophisticated hunting and gathering. Her makeshift home expanded into an intelligence gathering operation complete with solar panels, water purification systems, and communication equipment capable of monitoring enemy transmissions across the entire region. Lydia kept detailed logs of every enemy movement, every weapon shipment, every communication she intercepted. Her handwritten notebooks contained intelligence that would have been invaluable to American command, but she never broke radio silence. She was fighting her own war now, by her own rules. By year 5, she had confirmed 39 enemy eliminations, neutralized 14 weapons caches, and disrupted countless supply operations. Enemy forces had learned to avoid certain areas entirely, attributing the mysterious deaths to local superstition and supernatural forces. Lydia never questioned her choice to remain in the mountains. She thought often about her fallen teammates, about the mission they died trying to complete, about the American soldiers who were still fighting this war. Every enemy fighter she eliminated, every weapons cache she destroyed, every intelligence report she compiled was dedicated to their memory. She had become something unprecedented in military history, a one-person special operations unit operating completely independently, with no support, no oversight, and no official existence. She was a phantom in the most literal sense, haunting the mountains and protecting American interests from the shadows. But Lydia's greatest test was yet to come. In year 7, her early warning sensors detected something unusual, American voices on enemy communication frequencies, calls for help, the sound of an ambush in progress. After 7 years of silence, Captain Lydia Morgan was about to announce her presence to the world with a single impossible shot under the heaviest fire any sniper had ever faced. to save 20 fellow Americans who had no idea she even existed. Major Ryan Cooper pressed himself against the crumbling wall, bullets whistling overhead as his tactical display painted a nightmarish scenario. At least 30 enemy fighters had his team surrounded in the narrow valley, and his 20-person Joint Special Operations Task Force rapidly running out of ammunition. "Command, this is Scorpion Actual," Cooper shouted into his radio, receiving only static in response. "We need immediate extraction. We're taking heavy fire and communications are compromised." Lieutenant Mason, their communications specialist, frantically worked to establish a satellite link while taking cover behind a small ridge. "Sir, I can't get through. They're jamming our frequencies." Through his tactical binoculars, Cooper watched an enemy fighter position a heavy machine gun on the high ground to the east. The weapon was aimed directly at the shallow depression where half his team had taken cover, the only protection they had found in this exposed position. "RPG, everyone down," Cooper bellowed, but there was nowhere to go. The valley walls were too steep, the enemy fire too concentrated. 20 American special operators were about to die, and there was absolutely nothing anyone could do to stop it. That's when Mason saw something impossible on his thermal imaging display. A single heat signature appeared on the western ridge nearly a mile away. The position was insane. The ridge was too steep for climbing, too exposed for concealment. And the angle would require superhuman marksmanship under optimal conditions. These conditions were anything but optimal. "Major," Mason whispered, staring at his screen in disbelief. "There's someone on the western ridge." Cooper was about to dismiss it as equipment malfunction when the world exploded into sound. Crack! One rifle shot, precise and deliberate, echoed across the valley like thunder. The enemy fighter with the RPG spun violently, his weapon flying from his hands as he tumbled down the mountainside. Military story, revised for a "I voiced the rocket launcher hit the rocks but did not fire." Before anyone could think, a second shot was heard. The machine gunner fell over his weapon. Crack! 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 3 more shots hit their targets perfectly. 3 more enemy fighters were down. The remaining enemies stopped, confused and scared. Cooper saw his chance. "Cover fire! Move to new positions," he ordered. His team started shooting to force the attackers to hide, but Cooper was not watching. The enemy retreat. He was looking at his map, checking the numbers Mason gave him for where the shots came from. His blood went cold when he saw the coordinates. Grid 31,254 north, 451,178 east. Those numbers matched exactly where Captain Lydia Morgan went missing 7 years ago. "Impossible," Cooper whispered, looking up at the western ridge. Nobody could live up there for 7 years. And nobody could make those shots. Not in these conditions, not under heavy fire, not at that distance. When the gunfire stopped and the enemy left completely, Cooper noticed something else. Cut into a nearby rock face was a small symbol. Crosshairs with what looked like smoke around them. The same mark that appeared on dozens of mysterious enemy deaths in the region over the past 7 years. Local intel blamed the killings on different causes. Rival groups, accidents, weird forces. But Cooper was looking at proof of something much more amazing. Someone had been living in these mountains for 7 years, fighting a solo war against enemy forces, protecting American operations from the shadows. Someone who could make multiple 1,600-meter shots under heavy fire, at an impossible angle, in strong winds. Someone who was supposed to be dead. Cooper used his radio, which was suddenly working again. "Command, this is Scorpion Actual. We need immediate pickup and a full special ops investigation team. Something is happening here that is way above our level." As they waited for pickup, one question haunted every member of the task force. Who fired those impossible shots? 6 hours later, a specialized Delta Force investigation team arrived. They were led by Colonel Marcus Webb, a 30-year veteran who had personally trained advanced snipers at Quantico. The team moved with extreme caution. If enemy forces had developed technology to copy American sniper tactics, it was a massive security problem. Using high-tech climbing gear and tactical drones, the team climbed the western ridge where the impossible shots came from. The terrain was dangerous. Loose rock, steep angles, and exposed positions that would be suicide for any normal soldier. But someone had definitely been there. Recent footprints in the dust, disturbed plants, and most remarkably, a hidden position that was invisible from every angle except directly overhead. The hiding spot was a masterpiece of field skills, built from natural materials like stones, branches, and grass that blended perfectly into the mountainside. Heat signatures were hidden by carefully placed reflective materials. The entrance was concealed behind what looked like solid rock. Colonel Webb's team entered the position, expecting to find high-tech electronic warfare equipment or enemy surveillance gear. Instead, they found something that made no sense: a small, living space, perfectly organized and maintained. Military-grade water cleaning system. Solar charging panels connected to communication equipment. Detailed maps covering hundreds of square miles. Enemy movement patterns dating back years. And sitting calmly in the center of it all, carefully cleaning a rifle, was a small woman with short gray streaked hair. Her eyes seemed to notice every detail instantly. She looked up as the team entered. She showed no surprise, no fear. She carefully placed the rifle on a makeshift table and reached for a worn leather pouch. From inside, she took out a military ID card, faded but readable. Lydia Morgan, Captain, Marine Corps Special Operations Command. Missing in Action 2016. Colonel Webb stared at the ID, then at the woman, then back at the ID, his voice caught in his throat. Phantom. Jesus Christ, we thought you were dead. Lydia stood slowly, her voice quiet but steady. I never left my post, Colonel. I was just waiting for the right moment to complete the mission. Colonel Webb's hands shook slightly as he looked at Lydia's ID card for the third time. Around him, his Delta Force team kept their tactical positions, but their weapons were lowered. The woman sitting calmly before them was not an immediate threat. In fact, she seemed almost relieved to finally have visitors. Lydia, Webb said, softly, using her first name. We held a memorial service for you. Your parents think you are dead. Everyone thinks you are dead. Lydia nodded slowly, her expression unchanged. That was necessary for the mission, sir. I had intel showing this region was being used for major enemy operations. My official death let me operate without limits. She pointed to the notebooks, scattered around her living space. Dozens of them, filled with careful handwriting. For 7 years, I have been documenting enemy movements, supply routes, communication patterns, leadership structures. Every operative I eliminated, every weapons cache I destroyed, every supply convoy I disrupted. It was all preparation for what happened today. Webb picked up one of the notebooks, his eyes widening as he read entries dating back years. Detailed intel reports that would have been invaluable to command. Tactical assessments that could have saved lives. Enemy positions, mapped with surgical precision. You have been conducting solo reconnaissance for 7 years, he said in disbelief. How did you survive? How did you know Cooper's team was American? Lydia pointed to a small device monitoring multiple radio frequencies. I have been tracking all military communications in this region. When I heard American voices in distress, I acted. The shots had to be taken. 20 soldiers would have died if that machine gun had opened fire. She led them through hidden passages she had carved into the rock face over the years. She showed them an elaborate early warning system that would have impressed the Pentagon's best engineers. Motion sensors built from salvaged electronics. Communication intercept equipment built from spare parts. A complete intelligence network operated by one person for 7 years. The blast that killed my team was not random, Lydia continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. This entire mountain range has been serving as a staging area for major operations against American forces. I have documented 39 confirmed enemy eliminations, 14 weapons caches neutralized, countless supply routes disrupted. Private Johnson, the youngest member of Webb's team, stared at the wall where Lydia had carved hash marks. Each one represented a successful mission. Ma'am, why did you never try to make contact? We could have supported you, extracted you, given you resources. Lydia's smile was sad but determined. Because then I would have been just another soldier following orders. This way, I could protect American forces without bureaucracy, without politics, without anyone knowing they were being protected. Webb was beginning to understand the scope of what Lydia had accomplished. You have been a one-person special operations unit for 7 years, operating completely independently, with no support, no oversight, gathering intelligence that could have changed the course of multiple operations. The enemy thought I was dead, Lydia said simply. That made me more effective than an entire battalion. They could not prepare for threats they did not know existed. The investigation team spent hours examining Lydia's intelligence cache. Her documentation was extraordinary. Not just military positions and supply routes, but detailed personality profiles of enemy commanders, financial networks funding operations in the region, communication codes that had taken her years to decipher. Lydia, Webb said finally, what you have accomplished here is unprecedented, but you cannot stay hidden forever. The Pentagon needs to know about this. The intelligence community needs to debrief you. Lydia was quiet for a long moment, looking out through a concealed opening at the mountain she had called home for 7 years. I know, sir. I have been preparing for this day. Everything is documented, cataloged, ready for transfer to proper authority. She handed Webb a sealed envelope. These are my recommendations for future operations in this region, based on 7 years of observation. The enemy command structure, their likely responses to various tactics, their supply vulnerabilities. Everything American forces would need to know. Webb opened the envelope, scanning pages of tactical analysis that read like a masterclass in counterinsurgency operations. This is incredibly valuable intelligence. That was always the mission, sir, Lydia replied. Gather intelligence on enemy positions and capabilities. I never received orders to terminate the mission, so I continued until completion. As Webb's team prepared to escort Lydia back to forward operating base Ellis, she made one final request. She walked to her rifle, the same weapon reported destroyed with its owner 7 years earlier, and performed one last function check. Sir, I'd like to make one thing clear in your report, she said, looking directly at Webb. I didn't survive for 7 years because I was hiding. I thrived for 7 years because I was hunting. Every enemy fighter I eliminated, every operation I disrupted, every piece of intelligence I gathered, it was all for my team. For Harrison Matthews, Torres, Wilson, Chun, Rodriguez, and Davis. She touched the carved memorial wall where she'd etched their names. They died completing this mission. I lived to finish what they started. Colonel Webb realized he was looking at something extraordinary, not just a survivor, but a warrior, who had transformed personal tragedy into a 7-year campaign of protection for American forces. Lydia Morgan hadn't just survived, she had become a legend. The journey back to civilization would mark the end of Lydia's solitary war, but Webb suspected it was only the beginning of a much larger story. The debriefing room at forward operating Base Ellis fell silent as Lydia finished her preliminary report. Across from her sat a panel of officers representing every branch of military intelligence, their faces displaying mixtures of amazement, disbelief, and professional respect. General Patricia Winters, the base commander, leaned forward in her chair. Captain Morgan, in my 30 years of military service, I've never encountered anything like this. You've essentially conducted a 7-year-long special operations campaign. With zero support, zero oversight, and zero official authorization. Lydia sat perfectly straight, her hands folded on the metal table. Ma'am, my orders were to conduct reconnaissance and gather intelligence on enemy positions. I received no orders to terminate the mission, so I continued until completion. But you were declared dead, protested Colonel Stevens from Army Intelligence. Your status was changed to Kia. You had no authority to continue operating. With respect, sir, Lydia replied calmly. Dead soldiers don't require authorization. I was operating as a phantom, officially non-existent, therefore not bound by standard protocols. The intelligence officers exchanged glances. Lydia's logic was unconventional, but her results were undeniable. The notebook she'd provided contained 7 years of intelligence that would require months to fully analyze enemy supply routes, command structures, communication protocols, financial networks. Information that could reshape American strategy. In the region. The shots you took to save Cooper's team, General Winters continued. Our ballistics experts say they were impossible. 1,600 meters, extreme elevation, swirling wind conditions, and you fired while under direct fire yourself. From a position that shouldn't have been accessible to any human being. Lydia shrugged slightly. I had 7 years to study that particular shooting position, ma'am. I knew eventually someone would need cover fire from that specific angle, so I prepared for it. Dr. Angela Price, the base psychologist, had been studying Lydia throughout the interview. Captain, how did you maintain your mental health during 7 years of complete isolation? Most people would have suffered severe psychological damage from such prolonged solitude. I wasn't alone, ma'am, Lydia replied. Seeing the confusion on their faces, she clarified. I carried my team with me. Every decision I made, every action I took, I considered what Harrison would have ordered, what Matthews would have advised, what Torres would have thought. They were with me the entire time. The room fell silent again. These career officers were beginning to understand that Lydia Morgan wasn't just a survivor. She was something entirely new in military history, a soldier who had transformed personal loss into professional excellence, who had created her own mission parameters and exceeded them beyond anyone's imagination. General Winters made a decision. Captain Morgan, I'm recommending you for immediate promotion to Major, the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism, Purple Heart for wounds sustained in combat, and Distinguished Service Cross for exceptional valor. I'm also authorizing full military pension with 7 years of back pay. Lydia shook her head politely. Thank you, ma'am, but I respectfully decline all decorations and financial compensation. The panel was stunned. Colonel Webb leaned forward. Lydia, you've earned these honors. What you've accomplished is unprecedented. Sir, the only recognition I want is permission to return to Naval Base Coronado and resume my duties as a sniper. Instructor. No ceremony, no press conferences, no official recognition beyond what's necessary for administrative purposes. Dr. Price studied Lydia carefully. Why? After everything you've accomplished, why refuse recognition? Lydia was quiet for a moment, then spoke with quiet intensity. Because recognition isn't why I stayed in those mountains for 7 years. I stayed because American soldiers needed protection, and I was in a position to provide it. The mission was never about me. It was about making sure other operators could complete their missions and go home to their families. She looked around the room at the assembled officers. Every medal, every ceremony, every interview request takes away from the real work. I want to teach the next generation of snipers, pass on what I learned in those mountains, and continue serving in the way I'm most effective. General Winters realized she was witnessing something remarkable, A soldier who had refused the ultimate military honors because they would interfere with her ability to continue serving. "Very well, Major Morgan. I'll arrange for your transfer. Back to Coronado immediately." As the meeting concluded, Lydia left a sealed letter on the table. "This contains detailed recommendations for future operations in the region, based on my observations. I've also included tactical assessments and intelligence that should be shared with relevant commands." Colonel Webb picked up the letter. "Lydia, one more question. During those 7 years, did you ever regret your decision to stay?" Lydia paused at the door, looking back at the officers who had spent the morning trying to understand her choices. "Sir, every night for 7 years, I listened to enemy communications planning attacks on American forces. Every morning, I woke up knowing I could prevent some of those attacks. The only thing I would have regretted was leaving when I could still make a difference." She left the room with the same quiet dignity she'd carried through 7 years of solitary warfare. Behind her, the intelligence panel sat in contemplative silence, realizing they had just met a living legend who wanted nothing more than to remain invisible. Within a week, Lydia Morgan was on a transport back to the United States, carrying only her rifle, her dog tags, and the absolute certainty that she'd used her skills when they mattered most. 6 months after her return to Naval Base Coronado, the new recruits in advanced sniper school had no idea they were being trained by a legend. They saw only a small, quiet woman in simple fatigues with no rank insignia, no ribbons, no indication of her extraordinary service record. Major Lydia Morgan moved between shooting positions with fluid grace, making minor adjustments to rifles, correcting breathing techniques, teaching patience to operators who thought speed mattered more than precision. The recruits called her Phantom, partly because of her last name, but mostly because of her uncanny ability to appear beside struggling marksmen without making a sound. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Alex Brooks asked during a particularly difficult long-range exercise, "what's the furthest shot you've ever made?" Lydia paused, her hand still on his rifle scope. "Distance isn't what matters, Lieutenant. What matters is making the shot when lives depend on it." She didn't give lectures or appear in recruitment videos. She simply demonstrated perfect marksmanship day after day, setting an example that spoke louder than any words. Her teaching method was unique. Instead of criticizing mistakes, she showed students how to correct them. Instead of pushing for faster times, she emphasized the importance of patience and precision. Corporal Diana Martinez, one of the few female recruits in the program, struggled with the mental pressure of long-range shooting. During a particularly challenging exercise, she missed 5 consecutive shots at 800 meters, a failure that would typically result in remedial training or program dismissal. Lydia knelt beside her position. "What are you thinking about when you pull the trigger?" "Not missing, ma'am," Martinez replied, frustration evident in her voice. "That's your problem," Lydia said gently. "You're focused on failure instead of success. Try this: when you acquire your target, don't think about the shot. Think about why you're taking it. Who are you protecting? What mission are you completing? Let purpose guide your trigger pull." Martinez tried the technique. Her next shot was a perfect center hit. "How did you know that would work?" she asked, amazed at the difference. Lydia smiled slightly. "Because I learned it the same way you just did, by understanding that marksmanship isn't about the weapon. It's about the person holding it." The recruits began to notice that their instructor never missed a target, never raised her voice, never showed frustration. She taught through quiet demonstration and gentle correction, always emphasizing that true strength came from discipline, not firepower. Most importantly, she taught them that the best warriors fought not for glory, but for the people they protected. Captain Michael Roberts, the school's commanding officer, observed Lydia's classes with growing curiosity. Her teaching methods were unconventional, but incredibly effective. Students who trained under her showed remarkable improvement not just in shooting accuracy, but in overall composure and tactical thinking. "Morgan," he said after one particularly impressive training session where her entire class had qualified with perfect scores, "where did you develop your teaching methodology? It's unlike anything I've seen in 20 years of military instruction." Lydia considered the question carefully. "Sir, I learned that you can't teach marksmanship by talking about it. You have to demonstrate it. Students learn more from watching a perfect shot than from hearing a perfect explanation." What Roberts didn't know was that Lydia's teaching philosophy had been forged in the mountains of Somalia, where every shot had life or death consequences, where there was no second chance, no room for error. She was passing on lessons learned not in training facilities, but in actual combat against real enemies who were trying to kill American soldiers. During night training exercises, some recruits reported seeing Lydia on the range after hours, practicing by moonlight. They would find her at dawn, methodically cleaning her rifle, preparing for another day of instruction. She seemed to require less sleep than normal people, as if constant vigilance had become her natural state. "Ma'am," asked Sergeant James Anderson during an advanced target acquisition class, "do you ever get nervous before taking a difficult shot?" Lydia was quiet for a moment, looking out at the targets arranged at various distances across the range. "Nervousness means you're not prepared," she finally replied. "If you've done your job correctly, studied the conditions, controlled your breathing, understood your equipment, there's nothing to be nervous about. The shot becomes inevitable." Anderson nodded but pressed further. "What about when? People's lives depend on your shot. Doesn't that add pressure?" Lydia's expression grew distant, as if she was remembering something from long ago. "That's when preparation matters most. When someone's life hangs in the balance, you don't have the luxury of doubt. You either make the shot or someone dies. It's that simple." The recruits absorbed this lesson, not knowing they were learning from someone who had made dozens of such shots, who had spent 7 years in situations where missing meant American soldiers would die. As weeks turned to months, Lydia's reputation spread throughout the naval base. Other instructors began observing her classes, trying to understand her methods. Military psychologists requested interviews, wanting to study her teaching techniques, but Lydia declined all requests for formal evaluation or documentation. "I'm here to train snipers," she told Captain Roberts when he suggested she write a training manual, not to write about training snipers. The closest anyone came to understanding Lydia's background was during the conversation with Master Sergeant David Kim, a veteran instructor who had served multiple tours in Somalia. He noticed something familiar about Lydia's techniques, her way of reading terrain, her understanding of combat conditions, her emphasis on certain tactical approaches that weren't in any manual. "Morgan," he said after observing one of her advanced classes, "you teach like someone who's been there. Real combat, not just training exercises." Lydia met his gaze steadily. "We've all been there in different ways, Sergeant Kim, some more than others." Kim nodded, a look of understanding passing between them, but Lydia had already moved on to help another struggling recruit. One afternoon, during a particularly challenging wind reading exercise, a visitor arrived at the sniper school. Major Ryan Cooper, commander of the Special Operations Team Lydia had saved in Somalia. He stood at the edge of the range, watching as Lydia moved between shooting positions, making tiny adjustments to scopes and rifle stocks. When the training session ended, Cooper approached her. The recruits watched curiously as their instructor spoke with the decorated officer. "Major Morgan," Cooper said formally, extending his hand. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Ryan Cooper, Scorpion Actual." Lydia shook his hand, her expression carefully neutral. "Major Cooper, what brings you to Coronado?" "I wanted to thank the person who saved my team. 20 lives, Major. 20 operators who came home to their families because of shots that shouldn't have been possible." Lydia glanced around, aware that her students were watching. Perhaps we should continue this conversation in private, sir. In her small office, Cooper didn't waste time. Why did you refuse the medals, the recognition? What you did was unprecedented. Lydia looked out the window at the training range where her students were practicing. Recognition doesn't improve performance, Major. Results do. Those 20 operators are alive. That's the only recognition that matters. Cooper studied her, finally understanding something fundamental about the woman who had saved his team. You know, they tell stories about you. In the special operations community, they call you the Phantom Sniper. People like stories, Lydia replied simply. It gives them something to believe in. But it's not just a story, Cooper pressed. You spent 7 years in those mountains, alone, continuing a mission everyone thought had failed. You made shots that ballistics experts still can't explain. You saved 20 operators while under direct fire yourself. That's not a story, that's history. Lydia was quiet for a moment. History doesn't matter to the next generation of snipers, Major. What matters is that they learn to make the shot when it counts. Everything else is just noise. As Cooper prepared to leave, he handed Lydia a small wooden box. Your team, the ones who died in the Ide attack. Their families wanted you to have this. Inside the box was a simple medallion with 7 stars arranged around a pair of crosshairs. Engraved on the back were the words, "For the one who carried our family home." For the first time since her return, Lydia's composure cracked slightly. She closed the box carefully, her fingers lingering on its surface. "Thank them for me," she said quietly. After Cooper left, Lydia returned to the range where her students were struggling with a particularly difficult wind calculation exercise. She moved among them with renewed purpose, making slight adjustments to their positions, offering quiet guidance where needed. "Ma'am," asked Corporal Martinez, who had become one of her best students, "how do you compensate for variable winds? At extreme distances? The formulas in the manual don't seem to work consistently." Lydia knelt beside her. "The manual teaches you how to calculate. Experience teaches you how to feel, watch." Taking Martinez's rifle, Lydia settled into position, becoming perfectly still. The target was positioned at 1,200 meters, with swirling winds creating unpredictable conditions. Without using any instruments to measure wind speed or direction, Lydia fired a single shot. The bullet struck dead center. "How did you do that?" Martinez asked, amazement in her voice. "I didn't fight the wind," Lydia explained. "I became part of it. Learn to feel the air currents on your skin, to see how they move the grass, to hear how they whisper through the trees. The wind isn't your enemy, it's your partner in delivering the bullet." This became Lydia's signature teaching method, turning abstract concepts into tangible experiences, showing rather than telling, guiding rather than directing. Her students began to excel not just in marksmanship, but in overall tactical awareness. One morning, Captain Roberts called Lydia into his office. Sitting across from him was General William Hargreaves, commander of Special Operations Command. "Major Morgan," the general said, standing to greet her, "your reputation precedes you." "Sir," Lydia acknowledged with a crisp salute. "I've been reviewing the performance metrics from your training program," Hargreaves continued. "Your graduates have the highest field effectiveness ratings in SOCOM history. Whatever you're teaching them, it's working." "Thank you, sir. I'm here to offer you a new position," the general explained. "We're establishing an advanced sniper training facility for Joint Special Operations Forces. I want you to design the curriculum and lead the instructor cadre." Lydia considered the offer carefully. "What would be the objective of this program, sir?" "To train the next generation of elite snipers," Hargreaves replied. "To give them the skills they need to succeed in increasingly complex operational environments. With respect, sir, technical skills aren't the most important factor in creating effective snipers." The general raised an eyebrow. "What is, in your opinion?" Purpose, Lydia said without hesitation. Understanding why they're taking the shot, not just how. The best snipers I've trained aren't those with the steadiest hands. They're the ones who understand that every trigger pull has consequences, that the weight of lives rests on their decisions. Hargreaves studied her with new interest. That's not something you learn from a manual. No, sir, it's not. If you accept this position, you'd have complete autonomy to develop the training methodology. Whatever you've been doing here, scaled up for the entire special operations community. Lydia glanced at Captain Roberts, who nodded encouragingly. On one condition, sir, she said finally. No publicity, no media interviews, no public recognition. I work with the students. Directly, without interference. Simplified text for Capcutta. Voice Hargreaves smiled a little. The ghost instructor, I think we can do that. As summer turned to fall, Lydia began making her classes for the new Joint Special Operations Sniper School. She spent hours at the shooting range, testing new training methods, making better techniques, creating situations that would challenge students not just in body, but in mind and heart. One evening, as she was looking over class materials in her office, Corporal Martinez knocked on her door. Ma'am, may I speak with you? Of course, Corporal. Come in. Martinez sat across from Lydia, worry in her face. I've been offered a job on a forward team, but I'm not sure I'm ready. Your scores say different, Lydia said. You're always in the top group of the class. It's not the technical skills I'm worried about, Martinez said. It's the weight. Knowing that people's lives will depend on what I decide. Lydia was quiet for a moment, thinking about her answer carefully. When I was in Somalia, she began, surprising Martinez with the personal story. I made a shot to stop an enemy fighter who was about to attack a patrol. After I took the shot, I found his ID. He was 17 years old, forced to fight by warlords. That night, I questioned every choice that had led me to that moment. Martinez listened closely, knowing that Lydia rarely spoke about her past. The next morning, I heard radio talk about the patrol that would have been attacked. 12 American soldiers who made it back to base safely because of that shot. That's when I understood something basic about what we do. The weight of duty never gets lighter, Corporal. You just get stronger at carrying it. Lydia reached into her desk and took out a small brass compass. This belonged to my spotter, Sergeant Torres. Before every mission, he would say, True north never changes. Even when the ground does, find your true north, Martinez, the rule. That guides you when things are at their worst, and you'll always find your way home. She handed the compass to the young corporal. You're ready. Martinez looked down at the compass, then back at Lydia, strength replacing the worry in her eyes. Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down. You never have, Lydia said simply. As Martinez left, Lydia turned to the window, looking out at the range where a new group of snipers was being trained. She thought about the mountains of Somalia, about the team she'd lost, about the soldiers she'd saved with those impossible shots. Every student she trained carried a piece of that story forward, not just the technical skills of shooting, but the deeper understanding that courage wasn't about having no fear, but about finding purpose. Greater than fear, the legend of the Phantom Sniper continued to grow within military circles. Soldiers would share stories about impossible shots taken from impossible places, about a guardian angel who watched over American forces from the shadows. Some claimed she could read wind patterns that no tool could detect. Others swore she could make shots that broke the laws of physics. Lydia never said yes or no to these stories. She understood their value, not as proof of her own skill, but as symbols of what determined human beings could do when lives depended on them. As the date came closer for her move to the new Joint Special Operations Sniper School, Lydia got an unexpected visitor, Dr. Angela Price, the military psychologist who had talked to her after her return from Somalia. Major Morgan, Price greeted her. I hope I'm not bothering you. Not at all, Doctor. What can I do for you? Price sat across from Lydia, studying her with professional interest. I've been looking at the psychological profiles of your students. There's a pattern one found interesting. Lydia waited, her face neutral. Your graduates show much higher strength factors than the general special operations group. They handle combat trauma better, make better choices under extreme stress, and keep working well in conditions that usually make performance worse. They're special people, Lydia said simply. Yes, but there's more to it, Price continued. When asked about their training, they always mention one main rule you taught them, that the purpose of taking a shot is more important than how to do it. That view creates a framework for handling the psychological weight of their actions. Lydia nodded slightly. It's easier to handle difficult choices when you understand why they're needed. You've basically made a psychological protection method without knowing it, Price explained. You're not just training better snipers, you're training stronger human beings. The psychologist leaned forward. The military wants to understand how to copy this effect. They're asking for a formal study, interviews, records of your methods. Lydia's face stayed the same, but Price noticed a small shift in her posture, a pulling back, a preparation to say no. Before you say no, Price said quickly, think about this. What you've learned, through experience few could survive, could help thousands of service members handle combat trauma better. It could reduce PTSD rates, suicide rates, career ending, psychological breakdowns. The rules you've made could save lives beyond the battlefield. For the first time since her return from Somalia, Lydia found herself without a quick answer. Her instinct was to refuse, to keep the privacy she'd guarded so carefully. But Price's argument touched something basic in her understanding of duty. I'll think about it, she said finally. Not interviews or publicity, but maybe a training framework that others could use. Price nodded, understanding how important this small agreement was. That would be an amazing contribution, Major. After the psychologist left, Lydia sat alone in her office, thinking about the path that had led her from the mountains of Somalia to this moment. She had survived 7 years of being alone, made impossible shots under impossible conditions, saved countless lives through direct action and intelligence gathering. But maybe her greatest contribution would be what she passed on, not just technical skills or tactical knowledge, but a framework for understanding the deep responsibility that came with the power to take lives and save them. The next morning, Lydia arrived at the range before dawn, as was her habit. To her surprise, she found all 24 of her current students already there. Standing at attention beside their positions, Corporal Martinez stepped forward. Ma'am, we heard you're being moved to the new joint school, Lydia nodded. That's correct. This is my last week with this class. We wanted to show you something before you go. The students moved to their firing positions in perfect order. Without a word of instruction, they began shooting targets at different distances, from 300 to 1,200 meters. Every shot hit the center. Even more amazing, they fired in perfect time, 24 rifles sounding like one. When they finished, Martinez came to Lydia again, handing her a small wooden plaque. Carved into its surface was a single phrase, "Purpose guides the shot." You taught us that shooting isn't about the individual, Martinez explained. It's about protecting something greater than ourselves. We wanted you to know that lesson will continue through each of us. Lydia looked at the plaque, then at the faces of her students, men and women who would carry her teachings into the field, who would make decisions that saved lives because of what she had shown them. The most important shot, she told them, her voice steady and clear, isn't the one that travels the farthest distance or overcomes the most challenging conditions. It's the one that matters most to someone else, the shot that brings a team home safely, that completes a mission critical to our nation's security, that honors the sacrifice of those who came before us. She looked at each of them in turn. Remember that when conditions are at their worst, when the pressure is highest, when doubt creeps in, you don't take the shot for yourself. You take it for those who depend on you. As the sun rose over Naval Base Coronado, lighting up the range where future guardians were being trained, Lydia Morgan stood among her students, not as a legend or a ghost or a phantom, but as a teacher passing on truths paid for through sacrifice. The impossible shots she had made in Somalia had saved 20 lives in a single moment. The knowledge she now passed on would save countless more in the years to come. She knew was the true measure of her service, not what she had done alone in those mountains, but what those who followed would do because of what she had taught them. 5 years after starting the Joint Special Operations Sniper School, Major Lydia Morgan sat in her simple office looking over test scores from the latest graduating class. At 47, she moved with the same smooth efficiency that had defined her career, though silver now showed in her dark hair and fine lines had appeared around her amber eyes. The school, located in a remote section of Camp Pendleton, had quickly earned a reputation as the most demanding sniper training program in the world. Only the top performers from each military branch were invited, and even then, the dropout rate was close to 60%. Those who completed the 8-week program, however, showed abilities that redefined what was possible for military marksmen. A knock interrupted her review. "Enter," she called without looking up. Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Hayes, the program's administrative director, stepped inside carrying a thick folder. "Major Morgan, we need to discuss something important." Lydia finally looked up, noting the colonel's serious expression. "Yes, ma'am." Hayes placed the folder on Lydia's desk. "I've been reviewing operational reports from forward deployed units. Your graduates have the highest mission success rates in special operations history. They're accomplishing objectives that were previously considered impossible, and they're doing it with minimal casualties." Lydia nodded politely. "They're exceptional operators, ma'am. They work hard." "That's not what this is about," Hayes continued, opening the folder. "I've been getting inquiries from the highest levels of command, from military historians, from psychological warfare specialists. They're all asking about the same person, someone called the Phantom Sniper, a legendary operator who supposedly made impossible shots while under direct fire herself, saving 20 lives in Somalia." Lydia's expression didn't change, but Hayes noticed her hands had gone perfectly still on the desk. "The interesting thing," Hayes continued, "is that the coordinates for those legendary shots match exactly with the location where Captain Lydia Morgan was declared EMEA in 2016, and Lydia Morgan happens to be the real name of the instructor sitting in front of me." Lydia remained silent, but Hayes could see the careful calculation in her eyes. "Major," Hayes said finally, "I'm not asking for confirmation. Your service record reflects what needed to be reflected. But there's something bigger happening here that you should be aware of." She spread several photographs across the desk, images from combat zones around the world. Each showed a small carved symbol, crosshairs surrounded by what looked like a wisp of smoke. "Your students are leaving this mark at operation sites. It's becoming a symbol throughout the special operations community, a message that the impossible is possible, that no condition is too extreme, no shot too difficult when lives are on the line." Lydia studied the photographs, her expression unreadable. "What started as a training methodology has become something more profound," Hayes explained. "It's changing how special operators think about their capabilities, about what can be accomplished under the most extreme conditions." She pulled out one final document, a statistical analysis of combat effectiveness before and after implementation of what military psychologists were now calling the Phantom Protocol. Post-traumatic stress rates are down 40%. Among graduates, mission success rates are up 35%. Casualty rates have decreased by 28%. Whatever you've been teaching them goes far beyond marksmanship. You've created a framework for operational resilience that's transforming special operations. Lydia was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Ma'am, with respect, this was never about creating a legend. It was about teaching operators to focus on purpose rather than pressure, on service rather than self. I understand that, Hayes replied. But symbols matter, especially in military culture. The story of the Phantom Sniper, whether confirmed or not, has become a powerful catalyst for changing how operators approach impossible situations. As Hayes prepared to leave, she paused at the door. The Secretary of Defense wants to meet with you. Not to discuss Somalia or your service record, but to understand how your training methodology could be adapted for broader implementation throughout the armed forces. After Hayes left, Lydia walked to the window, looking out at the training range where her current class was practicing in fading light. 24 operators from every branch of special operations, learning not just how to make incredible shots, but how to carry the weight of responsibility that came with each trigger pull. The meeting with the Secretary of Defense was scheduled for the following week at the Pentagon. Lydia arrived in her standard utility uniform. No dress blues, no insignia beyond rank, no decorations. She was escorted to a secure conference room where Secretary Lawrence and the Joint Chiefs were waiting. Major Morgan, the Secretary greeted her. Thank you for coming. Sir, Lydia acknowledged with a crisp salute. I'll get straight to the point, Lawrence began. What you've developed at the Joint School has applications far beyond sniper training. The psychological framework, the focus on purpose over pressure, the integration of technical skills with moral responsibility. These principles could transform how we prepare all service members for the complexities of modern warfare. He slid a proposal across the table. We want to establish a comprehensive resilience training institute, with you as its director. The mission would be to adapt your methodology for implementation across all branches and specialties. Lydia reviewed the document carefully. Sir, I'm a trainer, not an administrator. My effectiveness comes from direct interaction with students. We understand that, one of the Joint Chiefs interjected. The position would allow you to continue hands-on training while overseeing curriculum development for broader implementation. There's something else you should consider, Secretary Lawrence added. The principles you've developed have applications beyond the military. First responders, disaster relief personnel, medical trauma teams, any profession where lives depend on performance under extreme pressure could benefit from this framework. Lydia's expression remained neutral, but her mind was processing the implications. What had begun as personal survival in the mountains of Somalia, followed by a desire to pass on hard-earned wisdom to future snipers, had evolved into something with potential impact far beyond anything she had imagined. I'll need time to consider this, sir. Of course, the Secretary nodded. But there's one more thing you should know before you decide. He pressed a button, and a screen descended from the ceiling. It displayed operational footage from a recent hostage rescue in Southeast Asia. A special operations team was pinned down under heavy fire. The hostages exposed to imminent danger. The situation appeared hopeless. Then, in perfectly synchronized movement, 3 operators repositioned, creating angles of fire that shouldn't have been possible given the terrain. 6 shots in rapid succession. 6 hostile targets neutralized. The hostages extracted without casualties. Those 3 operators were graduates of your program, Lawrence explained. When debriefed, they said something remarkable. They asked themselves, what would the Phantom do? And then they found a solution that wasn't in any manual or tactical doctrine. He turned to face Lydia directly. You've created something that transcends technical training. Major, you've changed how operators think about the impossible. When Lydia returned to Camp Pendleton, she found her current class engaged in a night training exercise, engaging targets from unstable positions while under simulated enemy fire. She observed silently from the sidelines as they executed with precision that would have been considered impossible just a few years earlier. Captain Mark Reynolds, her chief instructor and one of her first graduates from the program, approached her. "How was Washington, ma'am?" "Interesting," Lydia replied. "They have ambitious ideas." Reynolds studied her expression, reading more than she had said. "They want to expand the program." Lydia nodded slightly. "How's the class performing on the night infiltration course?" "Breaking every record we've established," Reynolds replied with pride. "Especially Chun Martinez and Kovalev. They've developed a synchronization technique for simultaneous target engagement that's remarkable. 3 shooters functioning as one." "I'd like to see it," Lydia said. Reynolds led her to an observation point overlooking the infiltration course. A brutally difficult terrain featuring steep elevation changes, unstable shooting platforms, and multiple target arrays that required split-second decision-making. Through her night vision, Lydia watched as 3 operators moved through the course in perfect coordination. No verbal communication, no hand signals, just an intuitive understanding of each other's movements. When they engaged the final target array, 6 targets appearing simultaneously at varying distances, they fired as a single unit. 6 targets neutralized in less than 2 seconds. "They call it phantom synchronization," Reynolds explained. "They've been studying your teaching on wind reading and applying it to team dynamics, feeling the subtle shifts in the group, the way you taught them to feel changes in the air." Lydia watched as the 3 operators completed the course. Their movements fluid and economical, their effectiveness undeniable. "What's the washout rate this cycle?" she asked. 58%, Reynolds replied. "Lower than usual." "The ones who remain, how are they handling the psychological components?" "That's the most remarkable part," Reynolds said. "The traditional stress indicators are present: elevated heart rate, adrenaline response, cognitive pressure, but they're channeling it differently. They're using stress as information rather than interference." This was the heart of what Lydia had been teaching, that pressure could be transformed from an obstacle into a resource when properly understood and channeled. It wasn't about eliminating stress, but about changing one's relationship to it. Later that evening, Lydia called the 3 soldiers to her office: Lieutenant Sarah Chun from Army Special Forces, Captain Miguel Martinez from Marine Raiders, and Lieutenant Alexei Kovalev from Navy SEALs. The 3 looked at each other before. Chun spoke. "From your teaching about wind patterns, ma'am, you showed us that wind isn't random. It follows patterns that can be read if you pay attention to the bigger system rather than just local conditions. We use that for teamwork." Martinez continued. "Instead of just focusing on our own shooting lanes, we started feeling the pattern of the entire team, where each person was in their breathing cycle, their natural rhythm, their position on the ground. It created a kind of shared awareness." Kovalev added, "Not just working together but true timing." Lydia studied them, seeing something she hadn't fully expected. Her students weren't just using her techniques, they were making them better, finding uses beyond what she had clearly taught. "There's a story that goes around in special operations," Chun said carefully, "about a sniper who spent years alone in enemy territory, who made impossible shots while under direct fire herself, who saved 20 lives when failure wasn't an option. They call her the Phantom Sniper." Lydia's face stayed neutral. "People find comfort in legends." "With respect, ma'am," Martinez said carefully, "the story isn't about supernatural abilities. It's about human potential, what can be done through preparation, purpose, and strong commitment when lives hang in the balance. The details don't matter," Kovalev added. "What matters is the rule, that the impossible becomes possible when purpose beats pressure." Lydia was silent for a moment, thinking about their words. What they described wasn't hero worship or myth-making. It was a framework for understanding human ability under extreme conditions, exactly what she had intended to create. "Your next training starts at 5 a.m., she said finally. "I suggest you get some rest." After they left, Lydia returned to the secretary's proposal, seeing it with new clarity. The program she had developed wasn't just creating better snipers. It was creating a new understanding of human performance under the most demanding conditions possible. The following morning, Lydia made her decision. She would accept the position as director of the new institute, but with conditions that reflected her core principles. No publicity, no personality cult, no compromise on the basic integrity of the training. 6 months later, the comprehensive Resilience Training Institute opened at a remote facility in the mountains of Colorado. Its mission: to develop and use training methods that enhanced performance under extreme conditions across military, first responder, and civilian crisis response communities. Lydia's approach remained hands-on. She personally taught the Master Instructor course, selecting individuals who showed not just technical excellence, but the ability to share deeper principles. The Institute's motto, written at the entrance to the main training facility, read simply, "Purpose guides performance." On a crisp autumn morning, Lydia stood watching a group of trainees, a mix of military special operators, FBI crisis response agents, and disaster relief specialists, as they worked through a particularly challenging scenario. The exercise combined physical stress, technical complexity, and moral decision-making under time pressure. Dr. Angela Price, now the Institute's chief psychological advisor, joined her. "Your integrated stress training protocol is showing amazing results. The brain data suggests it's actually rewiring how the brain processes threat response." Lydia nodded slightly. "It's not about removing stress. It's about changing how we relate to it. The applications go beyond what we first expected," Price continued. "The medical community is particularly interested in adapting the protocol for surgical teams and emergency response units." As they spoke, a helicopter landed on the nearby pad. Secretary Lawrence stepped out, along with an unexpected visitor. General Marcus Webb, the officer who had found Lydia in her mountain stronghold in Somalia 7 years earlier. "Major Morgan," Webb greeted her with a warm handshake. "Or should I say Colonel Morgan now?" Lydia had accepted the promotion only because it provided the authority needed to implement her vision for the Institute. "General, this is a surprise. I was in the region for a military exercise," Webb explained. "The secretary suggested I might be interested in seeing what you've built here." As they toured the facility, Webb observed training scenarios that pushed human performance beyond normal limits. What struck him most wasn't just the technical skill of the trainees, but their psychological strength, their ability to maintain clarity and purpose under conditions designed to create maximum stress. "This is amazing," Webb commented as they watched a team successfully complete an exercise that would have been considered impossible by traditional standards. "You've created something truly transformative." Later, in Lydia's office, Webb's face grew more serious. "There's something you should know. The original team you saved in Somalia, Cooper's unit, has been using your methods throughout Special Operations Command. They've become supporters of what they call the Phantom Doctrine." Lydia's face stayed neutral, but Webb could see she was processing this information carefully. "It's not about hero worship," he clarified, understanding her concern. "It's about a basic shift in how operators approach seemingly impossible situations. They're asking different questions now, not, 'Can this be done?' but 'What would make this possible?'" He placed a small wooden box on her desk, similar to the file one Cooper had given her years earlier, but slightly larger. "The families of the operators you saved pooled their resources to create a scholarship fund for the children of fallen special operators. They named it the Phantom Foundation." Inside the box was a simple certificate of appreciation and a photograph of 20 children, the sons and daughters of the operators whose lives Lydia had saved with those impossible shots in Somalia. 20 lives, Webb said quietly. 20 families that remained whole because of what you did. But that's just the beginning. The principles you've developed, the training methods you've created, they're saving lives every day in ways that can't be counted. As Webb prepared to leave, he asked one final question. Do you ever think about those mountains? About the 7 years you spent there alone? Lydia was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the Colorado mountains that reminded her, in some ways, of the terrain where she had fought her solitary war. I was never alone, she said finally. I carried my team with me. Harrison, Matthews, Torres, Wilson, Chun, Rodriguez, Davis. Every decision I made, every shot I took, was guided by their memory, by the mission we had sworn to complete. She turned back to Webb. What I learned in those mountains wasn't just how to survive or how to make impossible shots. I learned that human potential is defined not by our limitations, but by our purpose, by what we're willing to endure when something matters more than our comfort, our safety, or even our lives. That's the real legacy of the Phantom Sniper, Webb realized. Not the legend, but the truth it represents. After Webb and the secretary left, Lydia walked to the main training range where a new class was preparing for their final test exercise. Among them was Corporal Diana Martinez, the once struggling recruit who had become one of Lydia's most promising instructors. They're ready, ma'am, Martinez reported. This class has broken every performance record we've established. Lydia observed as the trainees took their positions. Their movements were precise, their focus absolute, their understanding of their purpose evident in every action. What do you see when you look at them? Lydia asked. Martinez thought about the question carefully. I see people who have discovered something essential about themselves, that they're capable of far more than they believed possible when purpose guides their actions. Lydia nodded slightly. That's what matters. Not the legend, but the truth it teaches. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, casting long shadows across the training facility, Lydia Morgan stood watching a new generation of guardians preparing her legacy forward. Not through stories of impossible shots or years of solitary warfare, but through the embodiment of principles paid for through sacrifice and forged in the crucible of extreme conditions. The legend of the Phantom Sniper would continue to spread through military and first responder communities around the world, inspiring individuals to believe in the extraordinary capabilities that emerged when purpose overcame pressure. But the real Lydia Morgan remained where she belonged, on the training ground, passing on hard-earned wisdom to those who would use it to save lives. The impossible shots she had made in Somalia had saved 20 lives in a moment of crisis. The knowledge she now shared would save countless more in the years to come. That, she knew, was her true legacy, not what she had accomplished alone in those mountains, but what those who followed would accomplish because of what she had taught them, that human potential was limitless when guided by purpose. As summer turned to fall, Lydia began making her classes for the new Joint Special Operations Sniper School. She spent hours at the shooting range, testing new training methods, making better techniques, creating situation. That impossible was merely a boundary waiting to be crossed when lives hung in the balance. And that true heroism wasn't about being extraordinary, but about finding extraordinary reserves within ordinary people when it mattered most. As darkness fell, Lydia walked among her students, making small adjustments to positions, offering quiet guidance, embodying the principle that had defined her life. Excellence lived in the smallest details, and legends were born not from seeking recognition, but from serving faithfully, especially when no one was watching. Remember, she told them as they prepared for their final test, the shot that matters most isn't the one that travels the furthest or overcomes the most challenging conditions. It's the one that serves the greatest purpose, the one that brings others home safely, that completes a mission critical to our security, that honors the sacrifice of those who came before us. In that moment, as her words resonated across the range, Lydia Morgan wasn't a legend or a ghost or a phantom. She was a teacher passing on truths that transcended marksmanship, truths about human potential and purpose that would echo through generations of guardians yet to come. The mountain spirit had become a guiding light, illuminating what was possible when ordinary people found extraordinary courage in service to others. That was the true shot that saved not just 20 lives, but thousands. The shot that transformed how we understand human potential under the most demanding conditions life can impose. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become part of our Everyday Heroes community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. 15 years after establishing the Comprehensive Resilience Training Institute, Colonel Lydia Morgan stood on the observation platform overlooking the final qualification course. At 62, her hair was now completely silver, though her posture remained perfectly straight, her movements fluid and purposeful. Fine lines had etched themselves around her amber eyes, not from age alone, but from years of squinting through scopes in harsh conditions. The Institute had evolved beyond anything she had originally envisioned. What began as specialized training for elite military units had expanded to include first responders, disaster relief specialists, trauma surgeons, and crisis negotiators, anyone whose work required exceptional performance under extreme pressure. The campus now covered 2,000 acres in the Colorado mountains, with training facilities that simulated every challenging environment imaginable. Colonel Morgan, called a voice behind her, Dr. Elena Vasquez, the Institute's research director, approached with tablet in hand. The longitudinal study results just came in. 20,000 graduates tracked over 12 years. Lydia turned, her expression questioning. The numbers are remarkable, Vasquez continued. 82% reduction in mission-critical errors under extreme conditions. 65% decrease in post-traumatic stress. 93% improvement in team resilience during catastrophic scenario simulations. She handed Lydia the tablet. But the most significant finding isn't in the statistics. It's in the qualitative data, the stories from the field. Lydia scrolled through the report, focusing on the testimonials. A trauma surgeon in Haiti. When the second earthquake hit during an operation, I heard Colonel Morgan's voice in my head. Purpose guides the hands. We finished the procedure by flashlight with aftershocks still rumbling and saved 37 lives that night. A wildfire response team leader in California. We were surrounded by advancing flames, no evacuation route, 20 civilians depending on us. I asked myself, what would the Phantom do? We found a solution that wasn't in any manual and got everyone out alive. A hostage negotiator in Malaysia. 18 hours into a deteriorating situation, exhaustion clouding my judgment, I remembered the resilience protocol, focus on purpose, not pressure. That mental reset led to a breakthrough that saved 26 hostages. Lydia handed the tablet back to Vasquez, her expression thoughtful. The methodology works because it's based on truth, not technique. Under extreme pressure, purpose is the only reliable anchor. There's something else, Vasquez added. The effect appears to be contagious. Graduates don't just apply the principles themselves, they transmit them to their teams, their organizations, even their families. It's creating ripples we never anticipated. As they spoke, a helicopter approached the landing pad below. Lydia recognized the presidential seal. Right on schedule, Vasquez noted. Are you ready for this? Lydia nodded slightly. As ready as I'll ever be. The President of the United States had requested a personal tour of the Institute, having heard about its extraordinary impact on military and emergency response capabilities. More importantly, he wanted to understand the core principles that had transformed how America's guardians performed under the most demanding conditions. As the presidential motorcade approached the main training facility, Lydia waited at the entrance, standing with characteristic stillness. No media had been permitted. No ceremonial displays had been arranged. This wasn't about publicity, but about understanding principles that were saving lives daily around the world. Colonel Morgan. The president greeted her, extending his hand. "It's an honor to meet you." "Mr. President," Lydia acknowledged with a crisp salute. "Welcome to the Institute. I've been briefed on what you've built here," he said as they walked toward the main training area. "The impact on our military and emergency response capabilities has been revolutionary, but I want to understand the core principles behind it." "I believe a demonstration would be more effective than an explanation, sir," Lydia replied. "If you'll follow me." She led the presidential party to an observation room overlooking a massive training scenario. Below them, a combined team of military special operators and civilian emergency responders was navigating what appeared to be an impossible situation. A simulated catastrophic infrastructure collapse with multiple casualty points, environmental hazards, and communication failures. "What you're watching is the final qualification exercise," Lydia explained. "We've created conditions that exceed what would be considered survivable in traditional training models." The president watched intently as the team moved through the scenario with methodical precision, solving problems that seemed to have no solution, maintaining composure under pressures designed to induce failure. "They're performing at a level I wouldn't have thought possible," he observed. "The key isn't in the technical skills, though those are important," Lydia explained. "It's in how they relate to pressure, to uncertainty, to the weight of lives hanging in the balance." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.